Hello, and welcome back to the Smells Like Identity Hygiene podcast. Today, we have Tim Bowen, who is a cybersecurity expert. He's also a product owner, and like me, he's a data nerd. Tim, thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks everybody for having me. Appreciate it.
So, Tim, I called you a data nerd, and one of the reasons I called you a data nerd, just kind of set the stage for everyone, is that I want to talk about data. Of course, we're going to talk about cybersecurity. That's why we're here. That's why our listeners are here. But I want to talk about how data, whether it's collecting that data, analyzing, transforming it, why does data play such a big part in anyone's modern cybersecurity program?
Well, data, as you know, is hugely important to the adoption of any product, right? So we need to understand what it is that we're looking to gather. We're trying to find any number of things. So, for instance, let's just talk about secrets or accounts for that matter. So we need to understand, for our compliance initiatives, if we are growing the platform and we're adopting any of those accounts into our platform, a vaulting platform likely. So in the case of let's say CyberArk, we have a number of accounts that we need to gather. We need to understand what's out there. We need to understand if we are adopting the platform appropriately. Are we gathering the secrets? Are we managing the secrets? Are we password rotating? We need to understand the secrets that we have if we are managing them. So for compliance initiatives, if in a compliance initiative, we need to understand our adoption of that particular platform, we need to have the data. So how are we going to get to that data? So in any number of different vaulting solutions, there's any number of ways that we can gather that data. So there could be a database that we can access. In CyberArk's case, there's a replica database. I can't remember the name of it. The DVM. So there's a replica database that you can gain information from a SQL table. So just doing simple SQL queries against it, you can do views on it. You can even use Power BI or Tableau or ClickSense, whatever your platform of choice for data analytics. You can gather all of that data and you can make very nice reports. Leadership needs to understand the adoption of any particular platform for compliance initiatives. Now, enterprise, typically compliance initiatives are sort of the hammer that we have to wield in order to sort of force that adoption. Without compliance initiatives, you're just telling people, hey, you need to get your secrets in. You need to have them managed. You need to have them password rotated every 180 days or whatever. Typically, application teams or product owners or anybody that has a secret or account, there's no recourse. There's no initiative. There's no drive to get them to do any of those things. So without the compliance initiative, we can't really tell anybody or make anybody do any of those things. So we have all of these secrets. What do we do with them? We don't know if they're rotating. We don't know if they have password compliance. We don't know if they're heart beating appropriately. We don't know anything about them. So in order to get all of that information, we need to get that data. We need to do reporting on it. So data reporting against any PAM or IAM initiative is supremely important to know that if we're adopting the platform or not.
Yeah, what's interesting, the way that you describe kind of the idea of, well, we found all these accounts, we found all these secrets, we found all of these, ultimately these issues, right? These risks that need to be addressed. If you don't have the supporting data around those things, you really can't get to the point where actually doing something about it, right? It's interesting that you have all these unprotected accounts, but the only reason that's interesting is because you need to protect them. If you don't have the data around those accounts to get to that protection, then what's the point of even knowing or seeing that data, right? Or knowing that you have those accounts. So, sorry, go ahead.
And even beyond that, let's go one level up. Let's go to leadership. Leadership doesn't really know or care all that much, other than just being a part of the security sort of initiative surrounding it, and ensuring that our security sort of platform is operating appropriately. So beyond all of that, leadership cares most about value and cost, right? When we're speaking that
Right.
language to them, we need to understand if the tool is giving us value. Is it doing the thing that we are paying for? So we need to have a good understanding of whether or not that platform is operating to its expectations and is worth the value that we are paying for.
Yeah, I talk to customers all the time, and they talk about, well, we've onboarded hundreds of thousands of accounts into CyberArk, and then my next question is, are you reconciling those passwords? And they're like, well, we haven't gotten to that yet. I was like, all right, well, you do realize you really haven't protected those accounts, right? Without that password reconciliation, without the kind of forcing someone to go into a CyberArk or any vaulting solution to check out those credentials in order to use those credentials, then essentially you've turned your vaulting solution into a glorified spreadsheet. Right. That's again interesting that you've onboarded those accounts, but you have to take that extra step. So the understanding of and again, this is where kind of that data piece comes in. And I always talk about data as a way to get to ownership. Right. Because if you think about it, and I always say that ownership is kind of the bridge between figuring out you have a problem to then actually doing something about it, because you need that person to take the operational risk of saying it is okay to do or not okay to do what you want to do. So talk a little bit about how data plays a part in that ownership piece, whether it's finding ownership or actually giving enough information to that owner so that they can make the decision about, yes, you can do this, or no, you can't do that.
Sure. Yeah, I can expand on that a little bit. So at the beginning of any acquisition, we have to plan out the tool's intended use case. We research all the tools that are on the market, some of which we may already have. And we have to establish the intent of what this product is going to seek to resolve. So we make a budget, then leadership agrees or disagrees on the value proposition. And if they agree, they're agreeing to the value that the product proposes, and they agree to the cost of it. At that point, the product has to deliver on its intended value, right? So if it doesn't, then what's the use for it? So sort of unpacking what you said. So establishing ownership. So I think I'm very interested in establishing ownership, and this I'm going to get a little bit into data quality here. So we're going to be I'll talk a little bit about like CMDBs, and I'm
Well,
particularly
you really can't talk about data without talking about data quality, right? It's
Right.
never just pristine data in, pristine data out. There's always the ugly transformation piece in between, right?
Wouldn't that be a wonderful world if we knew all the data was actually truthful? Our source
Right.
of truth was truthful.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's always a big
Or
problem.
or
especially
one
in
source of truth, right? It's never just one. It's 10 sources of truth, but these are all correct and not correct.
So establishing ownership, we need a way to sort of reconcile who owns what. So we have all these servers, we have all these accounts, we have a way to scan all of these servers and get all these accounts. Now, how are we going to decide who owns this? Where does it go? Where does it get vaulted? Who has access to it? Access, that's the name of the game here, right? So we need to figure out who can do what with what server, with what account, who has access. Access is obviously the name of the game. So establishing ownership, we need to have a clear path of that ownership. And really the only way to do that is with a CMDB, one that I can think of anyway. So we have to be able to understand if a server is owned by an application, and that application is owned by a person or an identity, right? So we can figure that out through a CMDB pathway. We can understand that an application owns a server. We can understand that application is owned by a person, and the people within that application have particular roles in the organization and can access this or can access that. And we have to understand what identities are going to be able to access what. So CMDB. If CMDB is not the source of truth, or is the source of truth and is not truthful. So how do we reconcile that? How are we going to understand who has access to what if the data source isn't truthful, if our data quality is poor. And in the enterprise, there can be a lot of different reasons for this. Bad process, simply, or there's no automation. Let's say you're onboarding a new server, it gets onboarded, somebody asked for it originally, and a bad process or bad automation didn't tie it to that person. So it's just sort of orphaned out there, right? We have tons of servers out there that are just sitting there. They're not owned by anybody, or they're owned by the wrong person, a leaver perhaps. It didn't transfer leadership. There's bad process. Or ownership was not transferred through automation. If somebody left that automation, there should be some sort of ticketing that should allow for that transfer of ownership. So I see this time and time again. Poor data quality is simply sort of the death knell of how we can establish ownership.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I talk about some of the issues with Active Directory groups, like circular nesting as an example, and I talk about, is it really a security issue? I mean, if the product that is using those groups is written correctly, it could deal with the fact that there's a circular nested group and kind of get the distinct list of users and subgroups, right? And not be stuck in an endless loop of, group A has group B in it, and then, group A is in group B again, and then you're trying to read that and you're stuck in that endless loop. So a good product will deal with that. But the problem is when that scenario exists at a customer or in your environment, it points to a process break. Right? Mm-hmm. If you think about it, even if it's distribution list and you have a distribution list called IT, and in IT you have DBAs and you have infrastructure and you have application teams, in what scenario do you have that IT group being added to the DBA group? Right? That IT group is supposed to be the all-encompassing group. The fact that it got added somehow, no matter how it did, maybe it was manually, maybe it was through some automation, but the fact that it got there points to some process break, right? Something went wrong that resulted in that scenario. And you should pay attention to that and investigate why that happened, because it could point to something that's causing a real security threat, a real security issue, like the wrong subgroup being added to domain admins, right? Or the wrong subgroup being added to enterprise admin. When we talk about data and we look at those types of issues, can you think of scenarios where, you have that it's not necessarily a security issue, it's more like an administrative or a data quality issue, but it points to a bigger problem. It points to something, rotten in the environment that it's worth kind of digging and looking for why this happened to begin with.
I almost wonder if you were slightly prepared for that. This feels targeted. No, no,
absolutely not.
In
no
fact,
way.
Something just got brought to my attention.
To be honest, I see that at almost every customer that we work with.
No doubt.
It is. No doubt. It's an example that I bring up all the time because I literally see it everywhere.
I'm just pulling your leg here. It's okay. No, because something just got brought up to me. I don't think you were actually involved in that conversation, as it turns out. But something got brought up to me where nested group upon nested group upon nested group, and we have thousands of identities that have access to everything. So we have now we have to take a look at that, right? Like what caused that to happen? And that's really interesting because what process was it that created that problem? Was it a manual intervention? Was it something that somebody just did to try and get around something? Or was this a part of automation that's sort of inappropriate now? Or is there a lack of automation that isn't taking out levers or isn't taking out people that are no longer part of that role? Why do we have thousands upon thousands? So something like that needs to be audited, right? We need to figure out, okay, do all these people need access to these things? Are these identities appropriate for this type of role?
What's interesting, I like to call them textbook engineers. There's that really, really bright, amazing education and background engineer that kind of just started and is learning the ropes. And then you have that kind of, grumpy, dealt with multiple outages, has been up at 3:00 in the morning way too many times to address an issue. And the textbook engineer may follow that textbook and do something because the textbook says this is best practice, whereas the The guy that's been in the trenches for a long time understands, yeah, you would never do that in the real world because it's going to cause all these other issues, right? And it's something that, sometimes the best practice is the textbook is wrong, right? The textbook, the people that wrote the textbook didn't manage an environment with 1 million accounts, didn't manage an environment with overly nested groups, and didn't manage an environment where you can't just go tell someone, this is the way you have to do it, because they'll turn around and say, I make money for the business, you don't. You do what I say, because otherwise we stop working, we stop making money.
I mean, it sounds like you peered into my past there for a moment. I ran into an issue. I was working for a very large cable provider who will remain unnamed at this point in time. They have really terrible customer service. You could probably guess who it is. So I was one of the lead engineers for a particular program, a customer-facing program that everybody needed to use to get access to any number of different things. When you access customer service and you get into the web portal, you need to be able to access what devices and what services you have available to you. And this all ties back to a billing system and whatever. So once upon a time, the system just went down for whatever reason it was. To me, it smelled like network. I can't remember exactly why, but at the time I remember like there's something going on here. There's definitely a network issue here. And somebody somewhere up above me said, reboot all the web servers. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. That's insane. I'm not doing that. And he just yelled and yelled and yelled until I was like, you know what? All right. You know what sounds fun? Let's reboot all the web servers in the middle of the day. Let's do that. So we went ahead and did it. Nothing happened, obviously. And then we ended up finding out and chasing down the network issue that it actually was. So that kind of stuff happens all the time. You have your textbook engineers that went by the book. Of course, reboot the web server. That is definitely the problem with the web servers. It needs rebooted. It's Windows. Right. Of course it does. And that's the textbook engineer. Exactly what we're talking about.
I feel like now you've peered into my past, because the story I have, similar story, is I think it was during the I Love You bug. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
It was like that was like a VB script, I think. And it was I think it was the first virus that spread out through email. I believe it was I Love You. I don't remember. Those days are kind of blurry. Again, 3 a.m. working late at night. And so we're trying to figure out. So at the time, I was actually responsible for the exchange engineering team. So we're trying to figure out how to contain this thing, how to stop it from spreading. And we're going through and we're trying to patch it. And we're on with Microsoft and we're doing all of this stuff. And we're on a call with a bunch of people. I wish I was kidding about this. The CIO gets on the call. So before he gets on the call, all of a sudden, the exchange administrator goes, "What's going on?" Everything stopped. I got kicked out of my RDP session. The CIO gets on the call and says, "Guys, I fixed it." You know how he fixed it? He literally went into the server room. This shows my age because someone could actually walk into the server room. Yeah. It was also a small-ish company. He literally unplugged the exchange server. He went in, unplugged the exchange server to stop the spread of this virus, and we're like, what? I mean, I guess he stopped it. He fixed it, but kinda, not really. But yeah, it's the idea of those external. There is the politics and external pressures. There is the, this is the way you do it, but actually you really can't do it that way. For example, I mean, we were talking about vaulting accounts. Well, on paper, if you discover 1,000 accounts that are privileged and are not onboarded into like a CyberArk, well, common sense says press the button 1,000 times and get them onboarded, right? Simple. Except that if you work for a financial organization and you onboard the wrong service account and you take down trading, you won't have a job tomorrow, right? Except that, you can't just simply do these things without that ownership, without, as we were talking, just to bring it back to the data, having that contextual understanding around that issue, right? Because there's the issue and then there's everything around it that gives you insight into whether or not that issue should even exist, right? Because potentially it exists for a reason, right? You have that local account whose password hasn't changed, because if you change that password, the person who wrote that application, who left 20 years ago, there's no one else that knows how the application works, and it'll just fall apart, right?
Yeah.
And you should fix those things. You absolutely should fix those things. But it also means that you have to be very careful and you have to do it in a mindful way, right? You can't just press the button and hope for the best,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and as a data guy, if I have bad data, right, I make bad reports. I take that to leadership. How can I say, okay, let's say I'm going to CMDB and I'm trying to find out how many servers are in the DMZ. I get that report. That's easy enough. There's an attribute for that. It says it's in the DMZ. I believe it's in the DMZ. I pull back the information. I get let's say 500 servers. I'm just making up a number. But I'm also noticing that there's other attributes in here that tell me that there's something inconsistent. Of these 500 servers, some of this data is telling me that there's no way possibly that these could be in the DMZ. So what do I believe? So how do I know whether or not these servers are or are not in the DMZ? And also, as I start to expand on that, how do I know that there are other servers that are in the DMZ that I'm not getting listed, that are not listed as being in the DMZ? So having these sorts of data inconsistencies as a data guy and trying to figure out what is where, and then how am I going to establish ownership if I don't know what exists and where it exists? So all of these data inconsistencies, they need to be flagged. I need to find out where they all are. I need to then pick apart each one of them and try to figure out, and to your point, we need to be able to figure these things out. How do I flag them? And I need some tooling to be able to do that in a better way, in a more scalable way.
Right. So when I talk to developers here at Sphere, I say, you guys don't actually work for a cybersecurity company. You know this, right? I tell them you actually work for a data company that happens to be managing or dealing with cybersecurity data. And there's a distinction. I would never say that to a product owner, right? I would never say that to a product manager, because a product manager has to intrinsically understand that data and understand how it works. But and some developers too, I will admit, some developers. But the idea of being able to understand the data and understand the relationships with that data to make sense of it in a way that, and process it, right? If you are someone who is just dealing with massive amounts of data and you have to figure out a way to correlate it, a way to say, well, X actually means Y in the real world, right? I think you do have to be, you have to be a data nerd, right? You have to love data. So my question for you is, do you consider yourself a security guy first or a data guy first?
That's a great question. I guess I never really thought about it. I'd like to think, or maybe hope and dream, that I'd like to be considered a security person. But I think deep down, if I look back to the entirety of my career, and even what I do in my off time, I can stare at data flying at my face for hours and hours and hours, and I'll just be happy as a clam. But when it comes down to, touching servers and rebooting or restarting IIS and moving around applications, I get bored with it. It's just a lesson in tedium at that point. I've done it so many times. It's boring. I can look at data all day, and every time it's new and refreshing and fun. So I guess I'll say I'm a data guy.
So is it weird that, when I'm writing a stored procedure or I'm looking at a piece of data and actually does what I want it to do, and it shows something interesting, something I actually get really excited, right, of seeing. It's like, oh wow, look at that! Look what I discovered by look how interesting that is, and for me, I also consider myself a data guy first, right? I actually started my career in infrastructure, rebooting servers and helping people with their desktops. And that was interesting. But then when I discovered that, hey, how can I automate? And then naturally from automation, you think about, okay, so I can automate, I can do automation to fix one issue. What if I want to fix 10,000 issues? Immediately you have to think about data, right? You have to think about Well, collecting the 10,000 issues. Where
Yeah.
are they? What's wrong? How do I do it? You have to do reporting, and you have to do, okay, well, did it work? Did it not work? So I have to report on that. And all of a sudden, you go into this kind of data spiral, and then you're like, oh wait, I'm a data guy now, right? And again,
Yeah.
you happen to be manipulating server data, but it doesn't really matter whether you're looking at server data or market data. You have to fundamentally understand how data relates and where the important bits are and the not important bits are, and how to represent it, and then how to take action from it.
What's funny, you brought this up, whether or not I'm a data guy or not, or you're a data guy or not, or like what do we do and what do we love? I wonder if it's sort of we're sort of built for that. I think you have to have the right kind of brain for it. I think throwing just about anybody at data doesn't always work, right? I mean, I can put somebody in front of a stream of data. I can put somebody in front of a database. I can put somebody in front of an Excel spreadsheet, and they'll sit there and go, "I can't look at this anymore. My eyes are going crossed." Where I feel comforted and warmed by it.
Yeah.
You have to be sort of built for it, I think.
Yeah. So, I guess we can't really have any podcast these days without talking about AI because, I mean, how could we? So how do you think AI plays into this, right? Whether it's the analysis side, the collection side, whether it's a shortcut to some of the analysis that you've done for years, right? In looking at these data streams, how do you think AI plays into kind of this whole discussion?
I mean, we're at such an early stage at the moment. I treat it like a shortcut. That's just me. That's how I'm using it right now. Is as a shortcut, and is to be able to establish trends in large amounts of data that I can't quite wrap my head around. There's multiple data streams coming from so many different places. How do I stitch it all together to make it make sense, right? So I can tell it to make sense. I can tell it what I want it to look like. And AI tends to do a pretty good job, at least getting me to a close enough place so that I can then do the rest and do some tweaking to get it right. So I do tend to treat it like a shortcut. I tend to treat it like a shortcut for a lot of different things as well, even for my writing. I'll throw things at AI that I just don't want to do. And I feel like AI at the moment, at the very least for me, is a great way to make my life easier. Now, how can this then sort of scale into the future? I'd suppose sort of taking away the human element from all of this, analyzing the data before a human ever sees it, and like I said before about, maybe we're built a little different when it comes to looking at data and being comforted by it and understanding it, and sort of just getting it right off the bat and liking it. I think maybe not everybody's built that way. AI is built every way. AI is going to be able to do all of those things that a person might not be able to do. And I believe that it can replace all of us inevitably in being able to understand the data, crunch it together and make sense of it, and then get it down to what I would normally do is report to leadership or operationally if I wanted to understand the health of the application. Being able to, so if I was the SOC, I want to understand who's going to be doing what. I mean, we already have AI for that. That's behavior analytics, privileged behavioral analytics, and user behavioral analytics is a huge field that's massively interesting, and also utilizing AI to be able to crunch all of that data and understand who's doing what, who should have access to what. Once we stitch all of that data together, AI can make a pretty good understanding of it and probably do pretty much everything that we're already doing. And you'd be making me obsolete.
Well, I mean, so I think about that, and the example I always like to give is, my father taught me that you could always know how clean the kitchen in a restaurant is by seeing how clean the bathrooms are, right? If the bathroom's dirty, chances are kitchen's kind of dirty too. If they don't take care to watch the cleanliness one place, they're probably not doing the other place. You think about AI and you think about it's amazing, right? It simply is. The things that it could do, the things that are just, we seem to go from pre-AI, post-AI, even though ML was around and advanced analytics has been around for years. But it did seem like it was a major shift. But then you have to think about fingers, right? AI still has a problem creating fingers.
Yeah.
Are fingers the dirty bathroom? Right? Are the fact that it still has a challenge kind of understanding because of the complexity of all the shapes that fingers can make, it has a hard time making sense of that. And if it has a hard time making sense of fingers, something fairly normal, static, does it mean that we're going to be relying way too much on that analytics? You take the data nerd out of the picture, and when you take the data nerd out of the picture, you rely on that AI telling you the right things, right? If it can't make fingers, can it actually analyze the data correctly without the data nerd?
That's a good point. That's a good point. Now, I mean, this could be a lot of different reasons. I mean, maybe, Stable Diffusion is still in its infancy. It's doing wonderful things, but I mean, have you seen some of these videos on TikTok where they're making what is essentially like fever dreams out of videos, and they're just telling it, "I want you to make a video out of this," and it looks very strange and oddly disturbing. So I know Stable Diffusion is in its infancy still. However, I mean, I know this is a metaphor, so. Perhaps it's AI is going to require data quality. I mean, if your data is crap, then AI is going to look at all of that and it's going to mash up a bunch of numbers that don't make any sense. But eventually, if all of these pieces were in place, if by making sure that our data quality was on point, AI could do its job much, much better. But to your point, maybe it can't sort of mash all of these complexities, and especially in an enterprise environment. I mean, massively complex, likely over-engineered. I like to think of, have you ever heard of the Emerald Tablet?
I have not.
It's an ancient Hermetic text, and really in it, it just states, as above, so below. And this is just a paraphrase for that which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is that which is below. And to do the miracle of only one thing. So the enterprise being sort of this massive giant, and it does this one thing very well. It makes money or whatever the product is that it is doing. It does this one thing very well. And in order for it to operate, the macrocosm of the enterprise, all of these tiny little things have to be in motion. We, people, just like ourselves, we are the macrocosm of our own bodies, and the tiny little cells in us are doing all the work to make this thing move and do the one purpose that humans are intended to do. So the enterprise being this massive thing that is comprised of all these tiny little things, and they move very slowly. And unfortunately, that's sort of the slow-moving nature of the enterprise or any large thing, and our perception of how those things move. I feel like these entities are sort of so massively complex that I don't think that we could ever really perceive how it actually works. Our minds can't wrap the massive complexities of how everything actually ends up working. Because it's a living, breathing thing, because it's comprised of living, breathing things, the end result is that it gets something done. The miracle of the enterprise is that it does the thing that is intended to do, just like as humans. We have no idea how most of all of this works. It's a miracle that we are able to actually walk around on this planet, right? So this massive thing, it moves very slowly, and this is another thing that I can kind of get into about the enterprise and sort of how it operates. It moves so slowly, I think, because one of the biggest drawbacks of the enterprise is bureaucracy, and I run into this a lot when I'm trying to do something, I'm trying to change something. This is the typical of enterprise is that it is change averse, and not so much that the people inside of it are change averse, but the living, breathing entity of the enterprise is change averse. If you try to change something, so many things have to change to accommodate for it. You introduce a new tool that's going to disrupt everything that you're doing. Let's say you're maybe bringing in a new tool that's going to scan a bunch of computers and get all of the accounts, and now we're going to find out what's
Well, I
actually.
wish I wish I knew a tool that did that.
I think we know of one.
Oh, I'll have to
Sphereboard,
look it up.
Sphereboard has amazing potential in doing all of these things, and it's going to make a lot of changes in a big organization. But to facilitate that change, so many other things have to change, and to sort of wrap our minds around all the things that have to change is almost impossible. We can't really foresee any of these things until they happen. Once we start breaking things, or once things start changing and other people have to change their jobs or change their tools, or allow this thing in or move this thing over here, these are all things that have to happen over time, and we don't really know what's going to happen until it happens.
So I can think of no better way to end the serious portion of the podcast with what you just said. I think it was very insightful, and I think it makes a lot of sense, right? And I think a lot of people are dealing with exactly that. I mean, I talk to people every day that are dealing with kind of the bureaucracy, the politics, and just the idea that, as you said, this organism of an organization doesn't like change, just like the human body doesn't like change and fights change. So with that, we always do this in every podcast. We have the serious questions, and then we ask the fun questions. So the fun question for today is, if someone saw you on the street, what would they think your job was?
Usually it's Russian hitman, but no.
Is it the mustache?
It's the mustache.
It must be the mustache.
My picture, my passport picture is the same look, and I have a turtleneck on, and I look very, very serious, and I don't have my glasses on, and I look very angry, and yeah, every time they pull me aside and they look at my girlfriend, they're like, "Are you okay? Are you sure you're with him?" No, she's with me. She's doing talk. No. So, no, I usually get, when I go outside, I'm a very big guy. So usually I go outside. People will ask, "Are you a professional bodybuilder? What do you do? How do you do it?" And I just say, just eat your vitamins, kid.
Just vitamins? It isn't like a steak or, lift heavy things, put them back down.
Flintstone vitamins, man. Flintstones and creatine.
Okay, so bodybuilder slash Russian hitman is the vibe, as the young people would say.
I'm also a competitive equestrian as well.
Oh, wow.
So I'm a competitive physique athlete and a competitive equestrian.
Wow. Well, I mean, I guess that would answer that question, right? Of the look, the Russian mob thing. I mean, I definitely could see it. The mustache really, between the size and the mustache, I think that really completes the look. Maybe the glasses. You'd have to take the glasses off just to really sell it, right? I think the glasses is calls for more like Russian, the boss, the guy that kind of moved their way up from hitman to, like, I don't know. Do hitmen have foremen? Do they have like the hitman who's kind of supervising?
Rosie, I can't tell you this. This is
I'm not sure if there's any kind of like organizational structure of
a friend of mine. I know. Let me do this really quickly. A colleague of mine, I'll say. So a colleague of mine actually went into the hierarchy and business structure of spam and ransomware. So this is a whole organizational structure surrounding this is ransomware as a service now. So I can just go onto the dark web and just go, you know what? I sure would like to run a ransomware campaign. How can I do that? You just go on the dark web and you say, I have $20,000. I would like you to turn that into $40,000. And the ransomware organization will actually give you a full business proposal. They'll give you a return on investment, how long it's going to take for you to get that $40,000, and what you're going to get in return. So maybe you're going to get, your 50 to 100% return at this point, and they'll give you milestones, and they have project managers. There's a whole organizational structure and hierarchy surrounding ransomware, and it is bananas to think about.
I mean, it's and I would assume that that has like the whole structure of individual contributors and the supervisors and then
Yes.
senior management.
Yes.
And I wonder if they I mean, it is a full blown business, right?
It
So
is a
all of
business.
the bureaucracy that legitimate businesses have to deal with, I wonder if they have to also deal with the same
They really
bureaucracy.
do
And
have to deal with a lot of the same stuff. They have their own infrastructure, but they have some extras that they have to deal with. They have to pay off the cops, right?
right.
They have to
Well,
work
cost of doing business, right?
exactly.
I mean, yeah.
They have to pay, so they have to operate in certain portions of a country. There are certain portions of the country where they can pay off the government, and the government allows for it. That particular localization allows for these ransomware businesses to operate and run. And so they have the same typical business structure and all of the things that entail doing business on a day-to-day basis. They have milestones, they have project managers, they have managers and senior
They
managers.
have to worry about cybersecurity. Right?
They actually do. And as it turns out, they're really, really bad at it. They're
Well, I would
really, really
expect,
bad at
yeah.
cybersecurity, as it turns out. So it's very easy to hack them. And get into their cameras and start, taking over their machines, even though they're taking over other people's machines very easily and quickly. And this is through social engineering, mostly. They do a really, really bad job of doing cybersecurity on their own.
I mean, that could be a whole business, right? Provide services to to illegal cybersecurity, cybersecurity services to illegal cybersecurity organizations.
It
right?
sounds like a viable business venture that I wouldn't want to get into. Yeah.
Yeah, probably not.
A little bit of risk there.
You'd have to come up with off-brand company names that do the same thing. So, Tim, can you tell people where they can find you if you want to be found?
Sure, yeah. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't actually have, I think it's just Timothy D. Bowen, the LinkedIn, / Timothy D. Bowen. So you can find me on there. I try to write articles as much as I can. It's becoming harder and harder the less time I have. I mean, I absorb myself in so many different things these days. It's really difficult to get around to writing articles. But I do write articles every now and again, and one of the articles that I wrote is PAM is a treasure trove of data reporting. So in that, I
highly recommend it.
Thank you. In that, I kind of go over some of the basics that I think a lot of organizations tend to overlook. A lot of organizations, medium, large, enterprise, they may have a vaulting solution, or they have some type of password management capabilities. But they have no idea what they're managing. They're just putting in their Google passwords or their credit card numbers. They don't really know what they're doing with what they have. Many organizations, small and large, will have Active Directory and groups and nested groups, and they may only have 10 people, but they have a number of service accounts that need to be managed, right? They need password rotation. When they first set them up, and I know this from experience, that most, especially small organizations, will set up their password 123 for all of their service accounts so that they can remember them, and then they go ahead and they store them, but then they don't manage them. And how do they know that they're managing? They're not doing any data reporting. Some really simple things that you can do to just report on the data that you have and get a better understanding of your security posture. And that's the word that I forgot earlier, security posture. Improve your security posture, small, medium, large, it doesn't matter. There's really basic stuff that you can do.
And it all comes back to data. Just as we've been saying, it all comes back to collecting, analyzing, and doing something about the data. So, Tim, this has been fantastic. Definitely, anytime you want to come back, you just give me a shout. I love talking to you. I love your insights. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Rosie. Yeah, I really appreciate you too, man. It's, again, always a pleasure talking with you. Every time I work with you, I have a great time. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Smells Like Identity Hygiene. Smells Like Identity Hygiene is a production of Sphere Technology Solutions, and our producer is Matthew Blake. Until next time.